Okay, YouTubers, this is Joe from ArtAlienTV. Now today we're going to be looking at two high-rise images from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. We've got this one, which is called Colourful Mawrth Vallis, right? And then we have this one, which is called Possible Jarosite-Rich Terrain in North Mawrth Vallis. Bit of a mouthful. Right, now these are both not far from each other and show some amazing colours and structures and things like that, but not necessarily intelligent structures. But what we have here is some weird stuff going on, and as I've shown before in previous videos, some of these dunes on Mars are not dunes, they are plants, okay? If you've been watching my videos recently, you would have seen this video here called Mars Giant Vine Plants. Now in this video I show what are supposedly dunes, which actually turn out to be vines. And there's also the Mars Giant Veg videos. I've done a couple about these things as well recently. So if you haven't seen those, check those out, because that will make this make more sense. Let's have a quick look at the giant vines first. Now this is from Jezero Crater North, okay, northwest, near where the new rover will be landing in February in 2021, not long now, okay? And this is just west of that area where it's going to be landing. And then we've got this amazing city area here, which I've shown before, with roads and buildings and ruins and stuff like that. I'm not going to go through that today because I've already covered this, but there will be links to this video. It's this one here. It's called Mars Giant Vine Plants, Canals on Mars, Part 2, okay? So I'm not going to play that now, but I'm just going to quickly show you parts of this. Now, these are called, according to NASA, they call these millipede dunes, okay? Because they have what look like little legs sticking out of them. They're not millipedes, they're just called that, okay? That's not something I've made up, that's something that NASA have coined these things as, okay? But in this area, as I showed before, we have some of these so-called dunes coming down here and then going over these branches. We've got branches coming out of the ground, very complex stuff going on here, and we've got these so-called dunes coming down and arms coming off the dunes and going around these branches here and objects on the ground, okay? And they're going into the ground as well. So I think what's happening here, as I've said before, is that some of these dunes actually have plants growing inside them, and they may be insulating themselves with the sand, which then freezes over and creates like an insulation blanket over them to prevent them from possibly freezing to death, okay? Because it does get very cold on Mars, especially even in the summer it goes down to about -90 or 100, and in the winter you can double that. So it gets extremely cold at night. So we have here an example of supposed dunes which have actual arms coming off, or branches coming off, like roots going down into the ground. So some of these so-called dunes, millipede dunes with these strange legs on them, are actually plants, okay? I've already established that, and if you go to my channel, you would, and you've watched these videos here, like the Mars Giant Veg video and the Mars Spiders video, which I put up the other day, and Mars Plants Cause Methane video. If you watch those, you will see that a lot of these things on the ground are probably plants and not dunes or just bubbles coming up from the ground. So there's some very complex stuff going on here, and I don't fully understand all of it yet, but I'm working through it and trying to make sense of some of these things. And the giant veg are the absolute killer here, because that has now made me rethink everything that I thought I knew about what's going on the surface of Mars. I've already covered all the things like mummified people and the structures and huge statues and pyramids and that kind of thing. I've already covered all that in the last few years. Well, in fact, the last 7 years. And I've pretty much exhausted the things to be seen in Gale Crater. There are still a few more things to show, but Gale Crater, I've done so much research on it now that I've pretty much covered everything that is visible from the rover so far and from space. So I'm moving on a bit now towards Jezero Crater and the Mawrth Vallis region, because these are places that I know are rich in very interesting things, and that's what we have here today. And basically, this is the main image I'm going to show you today, if I can find it. This one here. Now, this is weird. What we have here is not a crater. I'll show you a crater in this image here. There's a crater down here. Now, this you can tell is a crater, because you can see it's quite deep. It goes down quite deep into the ground. We've got sand at the bottom of the crater, completely normal, and we have exposed rock around the edge where obviously the crater, when it was formed, blew out the material and it's caused like a crater. And you can actually see the high luminosity material around the edge here, very reflective, because we're seeing into the rock exposed as it goes down into the ground, okay? Now that's a normal crater, but this thing over here is very strange. And what we do have in the area, there's another one here. This looks like a crater as well. It goes down deeper. Now, not all craters are deep, of course, so a lot of these may just be craters or sinkholes in the ground that have filled up with sand and material, okay? But this is really weird, because this one looks like a cocoon. And having come to the conclusion now that some of these dunes are not necessarily just sand dunes, I'm wondering whether this is something else we're looking at here. Now, the cool thing about this is I've uploaded a few different versions of this. I've got two of them up here. I've got this one here and this one here. Now, this one is a stereo pair with this one, so we can see it in stereo. If I line those up a bit better, I'm going to try and line them up so that they match position. You can actually see more shadow on one of them than the other. There's slightly different angle, okay? So this is taken from two cameras, or at least one camera that's moved slightly to one side, and then you've got a stereo image, okay? But unfortunately, I can't really overlap them because they're so enormous, these images. But basically what we've got here is a very strange structure with these small brick-like pieces on the ground, I'm going to call them. I've got it up here in my processor. Now, this one is really, really strange, and I'm still struggling to get my head around this. What we have here is all this material around the outside, which is probably clay material, concretion and clay material around the outside, in a sort of band that goes all the way around it, right? And it sort of comes down like that. And when you zoom into this, you can see that these are little, almost like block-like structures. Now, I'm not saying this is constructed, but what we have is broken up material on the ground, clay material that's probably been baked hard. This is probably a lake bed area, so we got clays and minerals on the ground that have cracked and frozen and expanded and frozen and expanded, and they've all broken up into little pieces on the ground, like crazy paving would look, okay? And then we have this rather strange oval thing in the middle. And now what this looks like is possibly, supposedly, dunes coming across here, right? You can see them coming across like this, right? But they've formed like a lattice, kind of almost like a basket, right? You've got these supposed dunes. Now, I was saying supposed because I'm not sure they are. Having found vine-like structures in these so-called dunes before, I'm starting to rethink how some of these things work, okay? And basically what we have, when you look carefully, it looks like layers upon layers. Let's get rid of all that. What we have here are what look like layers and layers of vines that have come across this wannabe crater, whatever it is, this hole, right? And we have, especially here, fans coming off the so-called dunes, like legs, right? Coming off here, you can see those little leg-type structures. I'm not saying they are legs, but is it possible that this is actual organic growth here? Because I'm failing to work out here how we've got this darker material inside here, and then we have dunes that only come up to here, right? Why do they stop here? Why aren't there dunes coming across here all the way across it? Why have they stopped there? It doesn't make any sense, right? So we've got what look like layers of dunes that have frozen, or possibly we have what could be construed as vines growing across here, like this one coming across here, and then more down here, like this. And then if you look carefully, we've got these weird teeth-like structures in here. I'm not saying they're teeth, but there's some weird stuff going on here. There's a gap there. It's almost like there's vines growing across it that have then been covered in sand, or sand's blown over them, and then it's kind of frozen onto it. It's very, very strange. And it doesn't make any real sense, because in reality, dunes do not form over each other, right? Normally you have ground, often flat ground, or you have a crater-like structure like we have here, and then the sand blows into it, and then over time the wind kind of makes patterns in the sand, blowing it along, and then you would imagine from the north east it would be blowing in this direction, right? And then it would form these ridges, right? But that's not what we have here. These are overlapping and joining up to form like a basket. Now, how would a sand dune or multiple dunes do that? It doesn't make any sense. It's a real strange one, this. I'll put some enhanced clips of this in at the end of the video. It's really weird. We've got all these little paving slabs around the outside, then we have what could be a collapsed lava tube or a sinkhole or something. But it doesn't look like a crater, because there's a lot more complexity to this than a normal crater like I showed you a minute ago. It's very, very strange. I'm not really sure what to make of it. There are other examples of this in the area. But basically we've got, in these images, we've got loads of things that look like collapsed lava tubes, very complex geological structures on the ground, and very, very complex things going on here. And it's pretty hard to work out what you're looking at some of the time. And there was something down the bottom here of this one. There was some weird little holes here, which next to a sort of rectangular structure here, which may be a building or two here that are ruined, who knows. We've got these weird holes in the ground. Some of them look square, like this one, got sort of square parts. I mean, a lot of this stuff is just very strange. This one here, it's got like a rectangular structure to it, sticking up. And there's a weird hole in the ground here. There's loads and loads of weird holes in the ground. And I think some of these are actually structures or dwellings, the remains of, like we have here. Got some weird kind of rectangular stuff going on here, as if this is a collapsed structure just here. But who knows? It's really hard to say. A lot of this stuff is obviously natural and highly complex, and it would be easy to hide structures in amongst all this stuff, because there's so much complexity in the different levels and structures and everything on the ground. Some of it goes down deep into the ground, some of it sticks up. We've got plateaus, we've got river beds. This is a highly complex area. And Mawrth Vallis, I think, had a lot of geothermal activity. So a lot of these were probably bubbling up from the ground through the clay, like geysers and stuff like that. And what you would call thermal vents coming up from the ground. So you probably had hot water shooting up from the ground. So these may not be craters at all. These are probably thermal vents that have now dried out. And a lot of this area was probably wet and high in bicarb minerals, much like some parts of Gale Crater may have been in the past as well. Okay, so that was that one. I mean, that was a weird one. I don't really know what to make of that thing. It doesn't quite conform to what I would call a crater. This is probably, like I said, a thermal vent that's no longer active, and it's got sand that's blown across, but the sand on here actually looks interwoven like vines, like some of those vines I showed you a minute ago. That's maybe what we're looking at here. We may have vines growing through this sand, which may explain why it's all kind of latticed and crossed. It's almost kind of like a basket, a woven basket. And this thing's pretty huge. I mean, it's about, if I zoom out, it's about 200 metres across, a bit less than that, about 175 from here to here. So it's pretty big. So that was a weird one. Now, I've got another image up here. I'll put links to all these down below in the description as usual. There's another image here, also of Mawrth Vallis. This is called Colourful Mawrth Vallis. And there's some weird stuff in here. Some of the dunes in this look very, very strange. And I've marked some of these things for you to have a look at. We've got loads of amazing colours here. And the dark blues may be cobalt or something similar, or lapis lazuli or something like that. We've got some really deep blue, purpley blues, greens, yellows. Some of these dunes here are really crazy looking and are amazing colours, like these greenish ones here. And I wonder whether some of these things are actually organic growth or vines growing along the ground. There's not quite enough detail in some of these to actually say either way, unfortunately, but they're amazing. And we got this amazing material on the ground, amazingly bright materials and dark materials, which have obviously eroded. We got plateau areas. We got some crazy looking ones down here. These are really nice. I mean, some of them are just nice to look at. I'm not saying that all these are necessarily artificial or plants or anything like that. They're just amazing colours and shapes. And they've got some amazing structures here to look at. It's just mind-boggling, some of this stuff. And then we've got some weird green dunes down here as well. These are unusual. You don't often see green dunes on Mars. But obviously if there's green material in the area, green material on the ground, when that erodes, it would cause green sand, of course. So we have blues and greens and all sorts of crazy colours here going on. And we have sinkholes or possible small thermal vents there as well. Some of these have got weird shapes in them, like this one's got a sort of squarish thing here. Very strange. So these could be sinkholes or something in the ground. So this is probably very unstable ground, I would say, and there's probably lots of lava tubes and thermal vent tubes under this material on the ground, and a lot of it's probably collapsed inwards. And what we're seeing, like here, are not craters at all. These are collapsed vents, I would say, a lot of them. And that would explain some of the strange things we're seeing, and may explain that thing I showed you a minute ago, which looks like a sort of weird cocoon-like basket. There's some amazing dunes here, and the colours are absolutely stunning when you look at them. When you look at these things, and they're really different to some of the things we see in Gale Crater, which are fairly standard, I would say, in Gale Crater, the colours. But in this area, there's a lot more going on, mineral-wise. And as I said before, this is a normal crater here. That's a crater. That's not a thermal vent. So I think a lot of these things were thermal vents that have collapsed. Big bubbles coming up through the ground, through the surface, through the clay surface, forming these holes, which are now dormant. If there are thermal vents in this area, which I'm pretty sure there are, it's highly possible that there are creatures living around some of these little sinkholes and these lower areas in Mawrth Vallis, because there's so much here. There's so many minerals and different things going on. I would almost guarantee it that there would be some forms of life in and around some of these strange sinkholes and collapsed thermal vents. Okay, and the colours actually are just incredible. If you ignore everything else and just look at the colours themselves, it's absolutely amazing. So that was it, really. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that we really need to start looking at some of these structures, or should I say dunes, in a different way, because a lot of them are not dunes. They have roots coming out of them and doing impossible things, like going around objects like this. They're not necessarily just dunes. Okay, we've got branches coming off them. They go around other huge branches like this one here, which comes right out of the ground here. This one here, and branches off there, and we've got these smaller branches that go over it. So there's highly complex things going on here, and we shouldn't take it for granted that we know what's going on. The only way to do true science is to push the boundaries and not accept just the dogma that we're told. We have to constantly question what we're being told and push the boundaries of knowledge forward by finding things and questioning everything, okay? So there we are. I'll put some clips of some of these things in at the end anyway. There's some amazing stuff here, but basically follow the links below. Check out these images yourself. There's so much to see in these images, and they really are quite amazing in colour and detail. And I'm sure you will find loads of weird stuff. Some of these holes in the ground are square, some are sort of rectangular, and we have green dunes here, which are just insane. You don't see those very often on Mars. Okay, amazing colours, and some weird basket-like cocoon structures, like we have here in this one, which to me looks really, really odd, especially when you've got all this smaller kind of like broken up material around the outside, and then this lattice-like structure here, which almost looks like a cocoon-type basket. Absolutely insane. So these may well just turn out to be dunes and that are layered in a very funny way and frozen, but I'm struggling to work out why they've got these little, what look like little limbs or legs coming off them here as well, and they're on top of each other, like they're layered, and that doesn't make any real sense. Geologically, that doesn't work, especially on Earth, but on Mars, who knows? Anything is probably possible. I mean, the details here are just crazy, and it doesn't make a lot of visual sense when you look at it. But when you look at them both together, like I've got here, when you look at them both together, you can see that one looks like it's sticking up more than the other, but that's just the angle. Unfortunately, we don't have this exact spot in colour yet. I'm looking for a colour image of this exact spot, and that may make more sense of this. And if I do find one, I will post some images of it in the end of this video, or very soon I'll do an update, okay? So thanks for watching, everybody. As I said, check out the links. If you want the Mawrth magnifier or the magnifying glass, it's called Hover Zoom, and it is available on Chrome and on Firefox, okay? So, and it's probably also available on other browsers as well if you look it up. Magnifying glass, Hover Zoom. It's a real cool thing to use with these images because you can get it nice and close, and you can see these little details. We've got these little kind of legs coming off these things, supposed dunes, which may not be. These may be vines, okay? And that sheds a whole different light on what might be going on in some of these possible landing sites like Mawrth Vallis, okay? So thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.